I'm Bill S. Preston, Esquire.
And I'm Ted Theodore Logan.
And I'm Anna Deinhardt, and they are Wild Stallions.
We are Wild Stallions.
Excellent.
Excellent. So this is obviously another fireless fireside chat, and since you can see we're wearing the same stuff we were wearing the last two, she has more questions about the same topic.
Yeah.
So we've spent already a couple hours answering these questions.
I can do this all
So I
night.
have another glass of wine.
Yep. Even me.
Even
and
Sparty,
even me drinking. This is how much stress you put me under, daughter.
So obviously, because Anna's told us that she's not finished with questions about Operation Barbarossa and Typhoon, the drive on Moscow. So now we're going to answer those questions. And yes, we're getting silly. That's why we're doing Bill and Ted references, because we like Bill and Ted, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Who doesn't? Only people who don't know Bill and Ted don't.
And those are the only people who don't like Bill and Ted.
So crazy.
Okay, so Anna, kick off our Socrates. kick off our questions.
Okay. So, Battle of Moscow and the halting of Barbarossa.
Okay.
How close to victory were the Germans at Moscow?
They saw some church towers.
They did. Actually, they could see the spires of Moscow.
But only with
and
really good binoculars.
But I will say that it's the halting of Operation Typhoon and not just Barbarossa.
Yeah, that's right.
That was a bigger operational thing. Typhoon was the actual drive on Moscow.
Wait, Andy, can we do it? Because I know that this is going to be competition. Yes, we know that they could not see Moscow. They were too far away. But if you have good binoculars, you can see Moscow. Let's just leave it at that and let's not comment on it anymore.
So what was the question again?
How close to victory were the Germans
They
at
weren't
Moscow?
close to victory. They were close to getting some guys into the city in minus 15, minus 20 Celsius weather.
It was even cold.
They weren't close to... I mean, look. Hey, what happened when they went to Leningrad? How long did the siege of Leningrad last? Whenever I mention Leningrad, the bells ring.
Yeah,
You know,
it's got to be a sign.
I mean, how long did the siege of Leningrad last? You don't think there's going to be a siege of Moscow? They didn't have the force to take Moscow. They didn't.
At this point, actually, now that you mentioned Leningrad, at this point, tens of thousands of people are dying because this is the real height of the starvation.
50,000 people died in Leningrad in the month of December 1941, mostly of starvation, because this is the height of the siege of Leningrad.
Actually, mostly by artillery fire.
Okay, yes, sorry. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But yes, a lot of starvation as well.
But no, they were not close to taking Moscow. They didn't attack Moscow because they couldn't. They couldn't get there.
Okay.
And they couldn't really see it either.
Okay, and was the Battle of Moscow the turning point per se, or was the German failure or foregone conclusion?
Well, the massive counterattack that began, I don't want to say counteroffensive yet because that doesn't begin until January, but the counterattack that began December 5th, that had been readied and stuff. It wasn't a turning point. And the turning point was if you wanted, I don't think they had any chance of taking Moscow from the beginning of Barbarossa. But the turning point, sending all that force down to take Kiev instead of keeping it in Army Group Center and aiming, if Moscow was the prize, then they shouldn't have diverted that force down. Kiev is a fantastic prize, looks great on the global stage and stuff, but you didn't need to divert force there. But the counterattack was a turning point, but that was just because it was ready to counterattack on December 5th. Had it been ready December 1st, they would have counterattacked December 1st. They weren't waiting until they got as close to Moscow as they could and go, ha, now we're going to attack. Now the full all along the line counterattack began in January. And that's when you get to Vyazma and clearing the Vyazma road and stuff like that, and Rostov and big prizes and stuff. But this, if I had to say a turning point in the Battle of Moscow, or an Operation Typhoon, when it really began to freeze.
Yeah.
Because, well, we've talked about, was it last time or the first time, we talked about the viscosity of the oil that the German tanks and stuff used. When it began to freeze, then, no, they weren't going to make it.
They were immobilized. I mean, you have to consider that
Krieg is not possible anymore.
And I mean, it comes down to, it's not even a question of do the motors work. They failed as well. But even the threads on the tanks stopped functioning because the oil that was supposed to keep the tank mobile froze. So they literally froze in place. And the Soviet oil, because of course that was made for these conditions, had a much, much lower viscosity, but a lower freezing point as well. So that
and the base of the tanks was a broader base to handle the mud.
So they didn't sink into snow and mud.
Suddenly the Soviet armor was much more effective.
But you know, it's funny when I listen to you say all of this, something strikes me. As we've said so many times, counterfactuals are impossible to answer. But there is a scenario where Germany wins this offensive.
Okay.
If the Soviets fail to put up a counteroffensive, if they do what the French did and the British did at the end of the day, for the Allied Expeditionary Force did in 1940, then Germany succeeds.
They succeeded in taking Moscow. I don't think they succeeded.
No, I'm saying we were talking about that, taking Moscow. Yeah. Sure. So there's that.
Stalin was very, very cool in November, and I mean that for all of Stalin's. There's a lot of bad things you can say about Joseph Stalin, and a lot of bad things you can say what he did to the Red Army and and with the purges and things, and what he did with production and la da 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 da. During the actual drive towards Moscow, Stalin was incredibly cool, which was specifically what was required then. If you want to say something that helped save that city, I still don't think the Germans could have reached it. But the panic in Moscow in mid-October. That ended because of Stalin. You had the entire city building the defenses of Moscow. That was putting the people to work there, and it really was a "we're all in this together" kind of thing, like the British during the Blitz. It was "we're all in this together,"
or like the Germans during the bombing of Germany.
So, but you cannot fault Stalin for his actions in October and November. There, that's something good you can say about Joseph Stalin.
Okay, and since you're already talking about Stalin, did the Soviets manage to hold Barbarossa because of or despite the leadership of Joseph Stalin?
Well, I think he answered that question.
Because. Well, okay.
That's not quite fair, though, because, I mean, it really is, I think because
gutting the army
really,
kind of...
but it's also really the central point. You just made it as well. The central point was that at this point, the Soviet Union had rallied behind a national defense. Yeah. It had really become an effort that united the Soviets around expelling the Axis alliance. And that's really important. There are moments in this war, even especially actually in the USSR, where they force children even, to dig trenches and stuff like that. But in October, November 1941, nobody's being forced to do this. People are doing it out of, the will to resist.
It's a civic duty. They
really feel, they're rallying by the hundreds of thousands.
And they're rallying behind specifically Joseph Stalin.
Yeah. So you can say what you will. I agree with Andy. I'm no fan of Stalin, as anybody who watches my content will know. But as Andy says, this is one good thing you can say about him. He actually managed to work like a burning glass and focus the Soviet will to resist into a burning point.
Okay, and was Hitler's interference in the war so extreme by this point already that it was responsible for the failure of Barbarossa?
If you ask a Darien, sure.
Is this a post-facto hesitation by Wehrmacht generals?
After the failure to take, this is December 1941 we're talking, the failure to reach Moscow, and when the Soviets were pushing back, and they were pushing back hard, and they had a lot of force, and the Germans were exhausted, and the Germans were giving ground. And a lot of those guys, Bock and Brauchitsch, particularly Brauchitsch, let's say Brauchitsch, commander of the army, Walter von Brauchitsch. Brauchitsch, no, we have to pull back. Hitler dismissed Walter von Brauchitsch as commander of the army and took his position. Hitler was not in that position before. We think of Hitler as a dictator who said, I do this, you do that. This became more and more the thing during the war. In December 1941, I think it was December 18th, although I might be wrong about that. But that took a new step when he took over as commander of the army. And he was even telling, like Halder and stuff, he's like, it's not actually that difficult to command the army. And then he issued his halt orders that no German units were allowed to pull back, despite what they wanted, despite what the German commanders knew. And that actually turned out, in hindsight, to be the best possible order, because making a defense in the winter while you're withdrawing would have led to a lot greater German casualties and a lot more German losses, particularly when your morale is crumbling because suddenly you're on the back foot. You know, they went over to defense December 5th. They were ordered over to defense. Hitler ordered them over to defense. And so that's suddenly your operation's not an operation. Until this point, Hitler's interference had not really been a thing. He wanted things, so he halted things in the Battle of France. He was worried about the flanks and stuff. And that gave the Allies a couple more days at Dunkirk and stuff like that. But this really went to his head because he really did make the right call against the advice of all of his well-trained and well-experienced generals and colonels and captains and everything like that. From this point, Hitler would continue to make the halt orders and the Fastungs and things like that. And more often than not, it was a terrible call. But this went to his head that it's easy to do this, Brauchitsch's job. So, no, during the Barbarossa and Operation Typhoon and the drive on Moscow, no, his interference was not ruining things, unless you consider him focusing on Army Group South instead of focusing on Moscow. But like I said, I don't think they could have taken Moscow anyway. But it was really from December 1941 when Brauchitsch was removed and he took that yes, his interference really became a thing. And we saw this, especially in Fall Blau in 1942.
The traffic jam.
Yes, see things like that. Yeah, we really start to see this in 1942.
So I'd like to tie back to, one episode ago, two episodes, the previous one, we talked about this, Hitler coming out of the victory in France with a lot of hubris and being ready to do those things. But we should remember, in view of what Indy just said, that in the period between June 1940 and December 1941, that hubris does not really translate into a tactical take of charge. He is, however, at this point very much in strategic charge of what's going on. Sure. So previously he had a lot of resistance about invading France and the lowlands, and that almost led to them rising up against him. All of that is gone. So there's the strategic leadership.
We're going to Yugoslavia. They're like, okay, buddy, sure, go to Yugoslavia. The strategic
leadership, he's got that. He's doing that, and he believes that he's the genius of the world, doing all of that. And then, as Indy said, because he succeeds in December 41 to stop disaster, he thinks that now I'm also a tactical genius. So we see a progression.
That's when you start seeing the real interference.
You see a
and taking more and more power for himself.
From hubris into stupid hubris, right?
Stubris,
yeah, good word.
Stubris.
Yes.
Okay, so during the campaigns in Poland and France, you often hear about German civilians at home taking little interest in the war. So is the winter of 41-42, when the war first comes home to Germany, in a real sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want more? Sure, I can give you more. There are many reasons for this. The first one being that the casualties are now rising into the levels where most Germans are affected. So most Germans will either have a relative or a friend who's been killed, captured, or severely wounded.
Crippled or something. And that's wrong.
Which did not happen before this, because the casualties during both the Polish offensive and the Western offensive were minimal. Yeah. And now you're seeing hundreds of thousands of Wehrmacht soldiers, well, actually over 1 million, wounded, killed, or captured. And that has serious effect. The other thing is that, people were hesitant about Barbarossa, but they were not opposed to it for the reasons that we've discussed in the previous two episodes.
Success everywhere.
Yeah. So there was hesitance about it, but it wasn't opposition. Once the thing bogs down in Moscow, that is not good for morale at home.
No.
It's the combination of these two things really makes it understood. But if we're talking about coming home, yeah, not only that, as we also mentioned in the previous episode, they were sent into this battle with the promise, or this campaign, with the promise that it would be over by November. They were sent in without winter coats, and now we're in winter.
It's minus 25.
In some cases, even minus 38, minus 40 up in the north, right? And they're fighting there, and they have to start actually collecting winter clothes at home. So suddenly, it's not just a question of hearing about it, having loved ones that you've lost in one way or another. It's also they have to start taking active part in the war effort on the home front. Yeah. And this is a huge backlash. But I think it's really important to note, this does not erode, not at this point, does not erode support for the war.
No,
and it does not erode
support for
Hitler's
Hitler.
popularity at all. It's only misgivings. And of course, added to all of this is the already by now old news of the failure in North Africa. So we have two campaigns that have, bogged down. They haven't completely gone away yet, but they've bogged down, both of them. And that is a difficult situation for the Nazi propaganda machine.
So if Germany had succeeded in reaching Moscow and carried on the momentum with Barbarossa, could we have seen Japan invade the Soviet Union in the East?
No.
We mentioned it last time. That absolutely no interest. So carving out a chunk of extra territory there would have been sending the Kwangtung army up there would have been
suicidal.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Okay, and if the Germans had taken Moscow, do you think that the Soviet Union would have collapsed?
No. They would have just headed east. That was the place. They moved factories.
Okay.
Of sizes we can't even imagine further east.
Editor, please put in a map of the Soviet Union and show us how far west Moscow is.
Yeah.
And now look at all that stretch of land. All the factories are already in that.
They've already moved on. And the factories by October 1941, factories that have been starting moving there in June, they're already in production. They're already producing nearly as much as those same factories were producing in Western Ukraine. And now they're absolutely unreachable to the war machines.
And Indy, I think that part of our ethos is that we should learn from history.
Okay.
There was another guy about 135 years earlier.
Steve Napoleon.
That guy.
You guys remember Steve Napoleon?
He took Moscow.
It was actually Napoleon, but he pronounced it with like an English pronunciation because he didn't want to say Steve Napoleon. Oh, Steve, little corporal, colonel. Sorry, little corporal was a different guy.
He took Moscow. Did it help?
Yeah, did not help.
Nope.
Taking Moscow does not win a war against Russia or the Soviet Union. I don't understand why people think that's going to work. This time it's going to be different. Why? Because this time everybody's got wheels.
Because this time we can see on a map that is accurate.
Yeah.
How much we've taken. Yeah, but you still haven't taken more than a fifth, I think it is.
Yeah, there was the plans were to keep moving east. I mean, Stalin, at this point in November and December, he knew what he was doing.
They even evacuated part of the Politburo and a lot of high-ranking officials to make sure that the government apparatus was staying intact. There is no chance in hell that taking Moscow would have changed anything.
They had already set up a Urals, like an ice hockey league, like a professional ice hockey league there, with a bunch of little towns.
It wasn't televised yet, right?
No, it wasn't televised, but it was radiovised. Yeah, it was radiovised. I don't speak Russian, otherwise I would do some radio broadcasts from the temporary Urals, glorious league of not professional hockey players. Because, of course, they weren't professional because they were doing it for the glory of the country.
Yeah, they were proletarians.
Yeah, and, the goalies rode tractors. That was the cool thing. It was
they didn't have Zambozis. They had tractors.
The goalies were... Okay, the goalkeepers were on tractors, and there were a couple of backs that had Zambonis, and everybody else just had hockey sticks.
But isn't a Zamboni a tractor?
Technically, I suppose. I don't know.
It's a tractor with a fridge on it.
Hey, write in the comments and let us know if a Zamboni counts as a tractor. Okay.
How did Goebbels and the German propaganda outlets spin the failure to reach Moscow?
Poorly.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yes, poorly. Go ahead. This is your wheelhouse.
Yeah, well, there isn't really much more to say than that. They tried all of these heroic, so they switched over from news about the front.
And then we were approaching Moscow, and boy, oh boy, Operation Typhoon, gonna get there soon. Oh, there's panic in Moscow. Woo! Yeah, they stopped that.
And so they basically turned up the expectations, and which you should never do. You should do it the other way around. Yeah. And when it failed, they were stuck with a disaster on their hands.
Yeah.
So they pivoted. They pivoted away from actually covering the news and started covering heroic actions and stuff like that.
And they accused former chancellors during the Weimar Ministry of crimes, of treason.
Yeah, they did.
To sort of deflect.
Yeah. So. They deflected. That was basically what they did, but it didn't really work. If you read the SS reports, the Meldungen aus dem Reich from this period, the Goebbels might think that he's doing okay and that he's managing it. Actually, we know he does. We know that from his diaries. But we know from the SS that the German people aren't buying it. They're very concerned.
They're like, we just lost. That's
how it feels. But there was still, there's that hope. We were still standing at Stalingrad or east of Stalingrad even. We might be able to do something and come down from the north, take the Baku oil fields. Who knows?
So close to the oil fields eventually, but they didn't have any machinery for actually moving the oil back to Germany.
Yeah, and this whole pivot, of course, from north to south is at this point not known to the Germans, but they're hinting at it in the propaganda. It's like,
we're not here. We don't need to destroy Moscow. We just really need to get the food and the oil, of course, to sustain ourselves.
Exactly.
It'll be a glory day. They're slowly, changing the
narrative. Pivoting. But it's not really working very, very well. What saves them is actually Pearl Harbor. Because on the 7th of December, the war...
Not just Pearl Harbor. I mean, the Japanese, they invaded Malaya, the Philippines, attacked Thailand.
I mean, the attacks of the 7th/8th of December, 1941, saves Goebbels' ass. Because at this point, they managed to then turn it around into now Japan is in, and now we, the United Axis Front, are going to pummel the
And so Hitler declared war on the U.S. You know who he didn't declare war on? Norway, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, the Soviet Union, Poland, Yugoslavia, and Greece. All those invasions were without any declaration of war. Kind of funny that the one country he did actually declare war against
was the only one he couldn't
was the
fight.
United States of America, the one he couldn't fight. Yeah,
and that has a lot to do with exactly this. There is also, of course, if you look at, there's another side of the narrative, and that is that we've already mentioned this in the previous episode, but that this is a suicidal war one way or the other. So you can follow the idea that Hitler's declaration of war on America is a suicide move, because if Germany isn't good enough to win, they deserve to be destroyed. But it's really largely a propaganda move, and that's where they turn it all around. And they manage to pivot and say, okay, now see, everybody's out to get us. This is sort of the high point of Nazi gaslighting. See, everybody wants to get us, right?
Yeah.
And that unites the German
people. And their greatest
again.
Expansion, if you look at the Axis together, if you look at the Italians, the Japanese, and specifically the Germans, look at those. It's July 1942 is when the Axis powers are at their greatest expansion.
So there's a lot.
So they're still growing. They're not shrinking yet.
Yeah, it's a setback, but it's not a failure yet in the view of the German people.
Okay, and can you elaborate on the planning that was going towards the end of 1941 and early 1942, which would see the Holocaust by bullets transition quickly into an industrialized, mechanized system of killing by the summer of 1942?
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Spartacus Olsen.
Thank you. So at this point, a lot of people say the Holocaust began in then January 1942. This is not correct. By December 1941, the German Nazis and their anti-Semitic collaborators and allies have assassinated a total of 1.4 million Jewish men, women, and children mainly in Ukraine, but stemming from all of the Eastern European states.
And that's the Holocaust of bullets.
That's the Holocaust of bullets. And they're doing it in the shooting pits. They have also starved to death. It's not really, it's the winter is the really worst part, but there's already over 1 million of Soviet POW that have been starved to death. And all of this is proving to be a logistical problem. It's really, really taxing to shoot people, even if you want to shoot them. Even murderers have issues with post-traumatic stress disorder. So by this point, after having killed that many people, and we're talking about tens of thousands of men being involved.
I think one guy that's had to kill like 100 guys or 150 guys who's not a natural murderer. I'm just thinking of somebody in that level.
They have to justify. We see it in the letters home. They try to like explain it with I'm doing the right thing because I'm killing the next generation of Bolsheviks and stuff like that. But it's not working. And we're seeing the suicide rates, the alcoholism, the drug abuse rates in the forces that are involved in this go up dramatically. And there are a couple of guys, specifically in the Polish concentration camps, and I think I'm just going to mention one of them, and that is Hesse, who is the commandant of Auschwitz, who are working at, and Christoph Wagner as well, should be mentioned, are working on finding a solution how to do this in a way that doesn't tax the own forces.
Yeah.
And they've been conducting tests. They've already killed a few hundred Soviet POW in Auschwitz using Cyclone B gas. Wagner has been trying out with carbon dioxide, which is taken from the euthanasia program of killing the disabled, which is also a terrible story
T4.
in and of itself, the T4 program. Yeah. So they're there and they're seeing two things. They're seeing A, it's taking a toll on our people that makes it unsustainable, and B, 1.4 million people is a lot, but our goal is 8 or 9 million Jewish people and 5 or 6 million Slavic people and 1.5 million others that we want to kill. And if we're going to do that, we're going to have to work out a new way to come up with it. So during this whole process, there is a discussion going on about what is then the final solution, how we're going to work it. The starvation camps aren't working either, because even the guys who are in charge of that, watching people starve to death is just too much.
Pretty.
It's not pretty, and it doesn't matter if it's people you hate. So this is really what it comes down to. And Theodor Eicke, who is at this point, he's not dead yet, but he will soon be dead. But he's no longer part of the Totenkopf divisions. But Theodor Eicke has provided the idea behind it already when he created the Dachau model in 1933, which is handed over to the prisoners. So you take the system of terror and torture and you take it out of the hands of the actual guardians of the camps, and you hand it over to the prisoners themselves and force them to torture each other. And they applied that, and then they take Wagner and Hess. Sorry, I said Hesse. Huss.
You said Huss first.
Huss. They take Huss and Wagner's findings, and they combine all of this into a nascent idea of using gas and forcing the prisoners to kill each other. So this is really the process they've gone through now. From the question, what do we do? Do we deport them all to Madagascar? Do we starve them to death in camp? Do we kill them by slave labor? They have now, by early December, arrived at the conclusion that the way to do it is to industrialize it and build death factories. And they're supposed, because Hitler gives the order in early December, that this is supposed to happen. He's been informed, of course, about the idea, and he gives the order, and they are supposed to have a meeting about it on the 5th of December, and to conclude the method and do what they're going to do. But then, of course, the counteroffensive starts on that very day. The meeting gets postponed, and this then and then Pearl Harbor happens, and there are attacks in the Pacific on the 7th, and then Hitler declares war on the U.S., and all of this kind of moves the decision out. So the perception is that we have a decision taken at Wannsee in January, in late January. But that's an erroneous perception because Hitler has already given the order personally. Himmler has signed on to it, and Heydrich and his men, all of them, have been now given the go-ahead to proceed with the final solution. And what happens at Wannsee is, at the end of the day, only a foregone conclusion. They only decide on the methodology of how they're going to do it, which of course provides us with an enormously cold and terrifying document showing how the industrialization of terror can work. But at the end of the day, the strategic decision has already been taken to do it. We've evolved from the Polish shooting pits in 1939 through the ghettos to the shooting pits of Ukraine towards a decision that means that we are now going to see the biggest mass murder in human history perpetrated by gas in the death camps. Never forget.